All right, it's ISFSI's happy hour on June 10th, and I'm Jason Coy along with Seth Barker, Matt Hoppel, and Peter Van Dorp, all part of the board of directors for ISFSI. And thanks for joining us today. And just a little bit of upfront about happy hour. We started this, what traditionally would have been our Indianapolis opportunity to meet and greet and socialize with our membership. And because of COVID-19, we pivoted and adjusted and started doing this instead. And there's been rave response from it. And so we've been hosting these weekly for the last few weeks. And we're just absolutely honored that you're all joining us. This is all about you. It's about your interaction with the folks that are presenting or sharing their knowledge. So please share questions in the chat box. And if you could be so kind, make sure your mics are muted for us throughout the event. These will be recorded and saved and shared on the ISFSI website at a future time. So with that, Seth Barker, who do we have today?
Thanks, Jason. So I'd like to introduce Brian Crandell here. We're super lucky to have him with us today. He started the fire service in 1976. He's interested in engine and rescue work, as well as training and leading in command. He's been a responding command officer for 22 years. Very big student of the late and great Chief Alan Brunacini. He's interested very deeply in firefighter performance, which leads to school. He earned a doctorate degree at the Montana State University in 2004. Research interests include understanding how firefighters learn to perform in high demand situations. Currently failing at retirement and working as a curriculum development, certification, and accreditation manager for the Montana State Fire Service School. So when I started my career, 20 short years ago, I had the fortune to meet Brian. Brian was a very big part of my organization. He provided a lot of training for us in the early years. So I really kind of snuck right in, and every time Brian's talking, I try to listen. And he told me something very valuable a long time ago. He said, Seth, anytime that you need help, just give me a call and I'll always answer the phone. And he's always done that. I've been on some big fires with him. I've been completely outgunned. Brian's always showed up to help me out. And so I did exactly what he told me to do. I called him up and asked for some help today, and he very graciously said yes. So with that, I just want to remind everybody to mute their mics, please. And if you don't mute your mic, I'm going to mute it for you. And then if you have a question, please do it on the chat and be patient, and I'll try to get to you as quick as possible. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Brian. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Seth, Jason, or you bring some attention to that handout document for the folks.
I'm sorry. So in the registration link for where you guys got onto the happy hour today, all the way at the bottom, highlighted in red, there's a downloaded PDF document that Brian's going to speak to today. So it'd be very helpful for everybody who's on this call to click on that link and try to download that, and we'll try to put it up on the screen as we're navigating through that. Thanks, Brian.
You bet. Hey, Chris. So I saw Chief Van Dorp smile when I heard Seth talk about me failing retirement. So since we're both failing retirement here. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Seth. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jason, for inviting me in, and honored to be in the presence of Chief Van Dorp and the rest of you as well. I'm an old guy, so looking at this screen is not how I generally spend my day, but I'm getting more familiar with it as time moves along. So if I touch, I'm not going to touch any buttons, and we have several back channel communications lines, just so you all know we're backed up with a alternate, a contingent, and emergent plan here in case the old guy messes up here. So you all should have a document or something in front of you there, or hopefully you can download that. We just titled it, in talking it over with Chief Coy for many years and Chief Barker for many years, is to say we're talking about influencing outcomes, right? That's what we do as people that instruct and train. And so really we just started with 6 words, which is rep the work, coach good reps. And for our experience is to say, when we think about what we do well and look back and say, well, how did that happen? Is for many of us, it's trial and error. And so because of my interest in how firefighters learn to perform under high challenge circumstances, I've tried to distill that down to as simple as I can. And if somebody said, pardon me, Brian, what do what would you like people to try to do when they're done with the call today? It's to work with their training plan and figure out ways to practice the work. And that if we can coach good reps in support of people practicing the work, that will expedite the learning process. And on that document that you have, one of the things that we say there is that you should expect pass rates among otherwise capable people. We should expect pass rates to be in the 90th percentile, assuming they're physically and cognitively capable, and that we should expect our training time to competence to be reduced if the approach that we take is that we're going to practice the work. Now, the good reps part of that, when we talk about coaching good reps part is really twofold. The first is having a clear understanding of what it is we want people to do. So what does right look like? What does right look like? And we got to show them what right looks like. And if you kind of want the cultural interpretation of that, just look at YouTube and ask yourself, when you had to fix the dishwasher, or in my case, change the fuel filter on a 1994 12-valve Cummins, I go to YouTube and I see who's got good reviews and who's got a lot of views and who seems to make sense to me. And then I try to do what they're doing. And sometimes I'll take my computer out with me in the shop and actually take it step by step, pausing and making it work. So having a way to show people what right looks like is part of a good rep. The other part of a good rep is how we coach it. And on your document there, you'll see a little box that talks about feedback coaching. And it's a really simple process. Is when we have a job task analysis or a script or a set of performance indicators, a task listing, if you will, of what right looks like, and we have folks practicing it, we're in a position as a coach where we can, if they're either on the cusp of making an error or making an error, we have the ability to give them we say just time out, right? And then ask them, what do you think's going on here? Okay, what's your plan? Now, we as coaches or instructors approve that plan, and then we say, pick it up from wherever you were before we stopped you. Pick it up from right there and keep going with that. And when you combine that package of methodology, the results are phenomenal. And fortunately, there's not only an experience base, very depthful experience base here on this call, but also just in life, is to say, you think about times you had to learn something, is to say, sometimes in something you did, you had to do it 4 or 5 times, and about the 4th or 5th time you started to really get it. And if you had a capable coach that could kind of connect with you and knew what right looked like and could bring those errors to your attention promptly, then you didn't practice it wrong. You actually practiced it right. And that little script there on feedback coaching is really called learner-centered feedback. And the performance improvement on that alone of telling folks, going from asking them what they think caused you to stop them, rather than you telling them why you stopped them, and asking them, the learner, to do a little problem solving right then, versus you telling them how to solve the problem. The 22% performance improvement rep over rep with that, just with that methodology alone. So when you put all these together, you end up with a circumstance where people learn the work to a higher quality and they learn it quicker. And the truth is, it builds a relationship where the instructor is an advocate for the learner, which many of us remember, hopefully for good reasons, instructors we had early in life and what an impact they had on us for our entire careers. And certainly been the case in my life and the folks that I hang out with. And so that's kind of a way to codify it, I guess, is kind of the bottom line. So we just say, rep the work, coach good reps. And if you want to influence outcomes in terms of people's performance, that's the best kind of summary that I could offer if somebody asked me as an instructor, how would I influence the outcome of this person's performance? And the information that's on that sheet, and obviously there's quite a bit more, including a reading list and a bibliography and whatnot, to back it up. That's an evidence-based package that's in PFE, what we call PFE, which is plain firefighter English, right? To just say, this is stuff you can go home and do. It doesn't cost a penny. to do this stuff. It's just methodology, which is, you know, that's one of the value propositions that instructors add, is how do we take the limited time and money that we have provided by our organizations and really the trust of our membership, and how do we use that in a way that gets us a return on that investment, and probably more importantly, how do we get a return on investment for our firefighters, and how do we get a return on our investment that our community makes in us by providing excellent service. So I don't know how long of an elevator ride that was, Seth, but that's the end of my lecture. Okay.
Hey, Brian, so something that I've learned from you, and maybe we could touch on it, or if I'm jumping way too far ahead, is when you're coaching reps, what's the significance behind stopping something that you don't want them to do immediately, or letting them play out through the scenario and then coaching them on the back end? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great question, Seth, and I think the convention has been many times to say they'll learn more from their mistakes than they do from getting it correct. And if you look at three domains of learning, right? Cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. That probably is a true statement in the affective domain, right? Of saying, I will never do that again. I just touched the stove and I'm never going to do that again. The challenge is that in the cognitive and psychomotor domains and how our brain actually learns, the opposite is true, which is if you did it and you did it wrong, you repped it wrong. And as much as you might never want to do that again, if you're in a high challenge circumstance and you start to shed your brain starts to selectively shed attention, which we call tunnel vision and auditory exclusion, you're going to go to whatever you have the most reps in that are most recent. So the evidence suggests that if we want to improve performance as an outcome that we want to influence, we've got to turn that into a learning opportunity at the moment, Seth, so that the rep that they complete is the proper rep. The opportunity for us as instructors is how do we interact with that learner for them to get the most out of it. And that's that feedback coaching note set that you have there, where you're basically going from instructor-centered feedback to learner-centered feedback. And if you want the kind of the historical background of that, you can go back to the Socratic method, right? Because that's what that is. And you're not screwing with them, right? We're just saying, hey, tell me what you're seeing. Tell me what it means to you. What caused you to make the decision? What critical factors were you watching that caused you to make that decision to choose that action when it's really not what we're looking for in the moment? So now you're learning about what the learner's seeing and thinking and what the learner thinks is important. And then at the same time asking, what do you think we ought to do about this? And because I hear a lot of places people will talk about stuff like, a lot of stuff where people will say, well, if I don't tell them what to do, they won't. And I hear around the country, these young, I love this comment too, because it's so wrong. These young people, they don't know squat. And it's like, did you give them an opportunity? Did you ask them what they thought? I mean, are you exercising that brain that you just hired? We didn't just hire you from the neck down. So I don't know if that addresses your question, but the evidence and my experience clearly indicate that the correction, if what you want is good reps, you have got to make sure that they have the good rep. And ideally, you want to get to the point where your learner understands that if they see an error coming, that their job is to stop, to fix it, and then to pick it up from right where they are and keep going, because that's what we want on the fireground. Pete, you were raising your hand or just waving hello?
Well, Caleb asked a really good question. How does this factor in with new recruits compared with more experienced firefighters? And my 2 cents is it's even more important. I'd like to know if you concur with that.
Oh, totally. We don't. Chief, tell me whether you meant it was more important for the recruit or for the senior people.
Absolutely. I think more important for the recruits. They need. It's more important to stop them, and it's more important to ask them, why were you doing what you were doing here? You got to get them thinking right away. If you don't give them that responsibility and that autonomy, I mean, we've got to teach these guys to think for themselves. We can't be teaching them to be robots. And if we expect them to be robot, and then at some point magically they're going to start to think for themselves, let's do it right from the beginning, Caleb. That would be my argument. And you want them thinking, you want them understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it, and you have to give them that authority right from the beginning. I'd be interested in everybody else's take on that and what their experience has been, because it comes with some risk. It's a lot harder to do it that way, and it takes more time. I'll grant you.
Pete, I think the paradigm there, though, shift is a lot of people think that firefighters coming in through the door are 18-year-old kids that are just going to do as I say, blah, blah, blah. Whereas the challenge in today's fire service, is what I'm seeing, is highly capable, highly educated firefighters that have 10 to 15 years experiences that are getting hired on different jobs, adults. And how do you do that and navigate that without shutting them down week one of academy, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because this brings to my mind so many of the things we unlearned during my career in the fire service. When the fire service that we know today was pretty much built, I would argue, post World War II. All right. And when those vets came back from the war, there was no, newly minted training officer telling them what to do. You know what I mean? These guys just came back from a frickin' war. You had to respect, they had experience, they had knowledge, they had education, and they were treated that way. When we slipped into the do as I say and shut up and all that, I'm not sure. But it wasn't with a bunch of vets, whether they were World War II or Vietnam vets. You didn't treat vets that way. I don't know when we started treating firefighters that way. Some of us did. But yeah, you've got to your point, Seth, these kids, they're going to ask why, and they deserve to know why, right? We need to be prepared to tell them that, because they are smart, they are educated, and they're probably smarter than a lot of us at least were, if not still are.
And we ought to have a why, Pete, shouldn't we? Really?
Oh,
yeah. So what's the downside in sharing the why?
That's the whole purpose of being an instructor. I can get anybody with a bugle to tell them because I said so. I can get anybody with 15 years on the job or whatever, counts for seniority in your corner of the world to say, because I said so. I'm hiring an instructor, or I'm minting an instructor to go beyond that, right? To give them the why, so that they understand what's expected of them and why. That's what we want an instructor to do. I can get any swinging dick to say, because I said so.
Hey, Seth and Brian, Jack McGovern has a question about the trend now for a lot of youth to be free thinkers. This resulted in personal questioning on the fireground. How do we embrace and move forward with what Brian's talking about while still instilling the sense of discipline on the fireground? Thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, I think with any authority comes responsibility, right? So if you have the authority to ask a question and ask why, the responsibility in the learner over their life really is to say, is this the time and the place to ask this? And can I ask this in a thoughtful way that's not demeaning to anyone? And so I think really it's a matter of setting the expectation and saying there is a time and a place to ask a question. And there's a way to ask a question. And I think what you're doing, and Jason, I know you're a student of leadership and cultures, and you've certainly created cultures in your time, so has Seth and Pete and many others, Chris on the call here, and just saying, hey, when we say you have the authority at any time to ask a question, you also have the responsibility that goes with that says you need to learn the time, the place, the demeanor, and do it in a way that, and I'm going to use the word constructive, right? To say there's a responsibility that goes with that. And we can never police that and should never have to. And I understand in some quarters that may not be a popular word today. Okay, we're not talking about enforcement of that. What we're talking about is embracing both of those. I can ask a question and I have a responsibility to do it in a way that's constructive. Does that answer your question?
Sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
Hey, Brian, can you talk about the paradigm change that you experienced in the beginning of this? Because this isn't anything new. This is something that you've been working on for decades and been very successful with, but it is a significant paradigm change. And maybe give us some insight on things to avoid as we start to develop a coaching mentality versus just an instructor mentality?
I'm gonna borrow a Brunoism here, which was, he said if he had fitness and wellness to do over again in the fire service, he would prohibit it, because then firefighters would absolutely do it, right? And I see some people smiling from that because they obviously knew the man. So I'm gonna be a little bit of a copycat smartass there and say, if I wanted to embrace a paradigm, I would prohibit it. Now, what does that mean, right? What it means is I would not fly a flag. I would just change my personal approach to it and just simply say, and I would tell the learners up front, and I would try to tell my colleagues, you know, I want to know where these people are coming from. You know, Bruno said, you're as good as your last fire. And what that means is that how you did on your last call is the sum of your entire system. So really, when we look at it, when we see a learner doing something, that's the sum effect of our brilliance. So if it didn't go the way we intended it to, if we want to talk about the instructional end of that, we're the majority stockholder. They just trusted us to train them. And if they didn't perform the way that we thought we intended them to perform, then we ought to look at ourselves first. So I would quietly and without any kind of a product identification or a program or anything, I would just try to talk my colleagues into letting me do that without them killing me. And I would have a conversation with the learners and say, I'm going to ask you questions here, and I'm not screwing with you. I really want to understand where you're coming from. And I want you to know that when I ask you a question, I don't want my behind kissed. What I want is I want to know what you're thinking. Now, I get that that's really about trust, Jason, and that's why you asked the question, I know, right? Is to say you're trying to build trust with them. Because we're in the field and we say things like, if you're not sure, ask. You know, don't hit it harder, right? Just ask. You know, Tom Brennan used to tell the story about this really sophisticated forced entry deal, and the one guy reaches up through the crowd of firefighters and turns the knob and the door opens, right? And so it's like, yeah, let's try to build some trust so if folks aren't sure that they ask. So that I'd prohibit it first. And then second of all, I would say, you know what, the deal here is that this is how I want to roll with this. And I want to do it for this is my why. And there's a responsibility in this for my learners too, to say, you're really the majority stockholder in the enterprise of your learning and your performance. The learner is. But I'm a 49% minority stockholder in it too. So we have a mutual interest here, and I want to serve that. And really, the truth of the matter is, once you've laid that out, right, for folks, Jason, is to say, what if they blow you off? Or what if they screw with you? And I say, well, thank you for being yourself. I'd like to remind you that in your position description, you're going to notice that you're an at-will employee, and your behavior right here, right now is maladaptive, and you are selecting yourself out of this system and into a system other than here where you're probably going to be successful. And we have a hand signal for that in case you're not clear. And it looks like this. And that's flipping burgers. So,
hey, Brian, Chris has a question for you. What are your thoughts on the movement or idea out there in the fire service of spending the first week or two in academy on the SEAL Team 6 format?
Well, if you're going to provide successful candidates for SEAL Team 6, which I have a great deal of respect for, then I would suggest that you treat them like SEAL Team 6. I do have some connection into the SMU community, and when I listen to the people that are actually there, I don't hear that same story. And when you are preparing people to do the work that we do, and you contrast that with the preparation of the work you're asking special operations forces to do, it's different work. I don't know who caller 3 is, but they're doing terrific. Anyway, yeah, we're good. We okay?
Yep, go ahead.
So the method should match the work, and so should the content. And that's the deal. And I want to qualify that remark by saying I'm a recovering screamer. In an earlier life, I may have spoken loudly, and furniture may have moved in a random kind of appearing kind of way. And through my own stepping on a rake here or there, ended up figuring out that that's really not necessary and not productive. And what I saw when we started engaging people in the cultural way that we said we wanted them to operate in the fire department, when they were done with training, when we started to treat them that way as new members, that's how they acted. And so I've never been on SEAL Team 6. I don't know that anybody that's not been there knows what they do, but every indication I have is that the method and the content matches the work. And I think most people would say that the work that they do and the work that we do has a little bit of difference in it. And I'm being a little bit sarcastic.
Yeah, I just wanted to back you up a little bit on that, Brian. You know, our State Fire Academy, our director is a retired Marine Corps colonel.
Yes, sir.
And he's our second retired Marine Corps colonel, so we've had a couple of them. And this particular one ran their officer candidate school, was his last assignment prior to coming to us. So here's a guy that knows the routine, at least from the Marine Corps perspective. And he's helped us a lot translate some of those concepts from the military to the fire service. And much like you articulated, he says use caution, right? The Marine Corps doesn't have a collective bargaining agreement, right? And they're all volunteers. And I mean, there are some things that are different, and will change that environment, right? And the attrition is very different. All those sorts of things. So there's a lot to learn and a lot that we can adapt from those folks, but proceed with caution and certainly not lock, stock, and barrel, I think was part of your point.
Yeah, and I think if you look, in fact, it was just published after the first of the year, and I can send it to anybody that sends me a note. The Marine Corps just put out a doctrinal piece, I think it's 7, and it's interesting, they titled it Learning. They did not title it Training. And when you read it and you read whose work they cite, they go all the way back to Malcolm Knowles, who's widely regarded in the propeller head education world as kind of the one of the founders of a methodology that relates to adult learning. And when you read that doctrinal, and it's a doctrinal piece, Pete, when you read that, they're doing that because they don't have unlimited resources. They don't have unlimited money. They don't have unlimited candidates. And what they're trying to do, figure out very quickly, is does this person belong and can they do the work? By belong, it's to say, are we in alignment culturally? Are we in alignment with our values? Are we in alignment with how we're going to think and operate going forward? And can we do the work? Right. And so it's very interesting when you read that to say that looks nothing like the stereotype of and I'm going to call it a stereotype because it's not accurate in my experience talking broadly, I'm saying. Right?
Yeah, and I think before we go too much further, we ought to ask Chris, are we answering your question, and what did you mean, or what did you mean by the SEAL Team 6 format? Because just to make sure we're not speaking to something he wasn't asking about. You want to jump in?
So we're actually going to apply what we're talking about into the happy hour here. That's awesome. Hey, no, it's been a widely asked question in the ranks of my department for the last several years that we spend the first week, sometimes 2 weeks, almost beating people into submission and trying to get them to quit before they've even started. And it seems like every time those of us question their methodologies, we're looked upon like we don't really know what we're talking about, or don't question them because they know the method to their madness. But most of us know that there's got to be a better way, or that they shouldn't be doing that. So just trying to validate the other way of thinking.
You send me a note, Chris. The email's on that sheet. If you send me a note, I'll send you the PDF of that Marine Corps document in case somebody wants to challenge you on that piece. But let me just say this is a question, a rational question. And I know Chris is online and Jason's online, and now Chief Van Dorp being a chief, is just simply, a fire chief is just say, why would you hire people that the only way we can get them to perform is to treat them in a way that is completely inconsistent with how we want to treat the customer internally and externally. Somebody explain the connection between those two behavior sets. And if you're not sure about that, let me be a little stereotypical and say, let's wander on down to the trailer hood and see how that's working out for the kids. And I've lived in trailers. I'm being a little bit funny there, is to say, you have a disrupted family life. Check out what happens to the kids. And there was, so why would we do that, right? And I see you nod, and I appreciate that. But I don't find a factual basis for that based on the work that we do and the physical, cognitive components of what's necessary to do our work. I don't find that methodology as described in popular culture, first of all, to be consistent with what's actually taken place in the SMUs in the military, and secondly, with the evidence in relation to the work that we do.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, I'd be interested in knowing if any of those instructors were actual DIs in the military. Okay, and that's very telling, because one of the fortunate things that I had happen when I was director in Chicago was I had a DI to run that part of the program, and he completely transformed how we did it, because he was a Marine Corps DI, and you know, there was some yelling and screaming, and that was just the shock and awe kind of part of it, but that was did not make, there was no trying to break people or get rid of them or whatever. Yeah, it completely changed the complexity of how the program went when you had a guy that really knew what the end goal of all that was, and would therefore temper it properly and wasn't misusing the process. And I found that very insightful, very instructive, and you might seek in your organization, maybe you've got somebody with that kind of background that can help redirect that process.
Jack, you had a question there? Where's Jack? Jack's question is, Brian, with your process, have you ever reached a point where you tell somebody that they just can't cut it and they're not meant for firefighting? Unfortunately, too many of us are forced by our administration to keep everyone for a job that isn't meant for everyone.
Well, I think as a younger person, I'm sure I might have said that, but it was uninformed. And I would say the more my responsibility increased, the more I learned that if the organization has described what kind of demonstrated ability and engagement it takes to be a successful member, I absolutely have informed people that the abilities that you are demonstrating do not meet the legitimate job expectation standards that we have for our work, or that their engagement is not in alignment with the values and conduct that our organization expects. And I've absolutely delivered that message many, many times. Although when I did it the way I just described it, I had absolutely no reason to raise my voice. It was never a judgment. It was simply a comparison between what they did on the one hand and what the organization wanted on the other. And that was after many, many sessions of trying to help them understand what right looked like, so that they had every opportunity to make a choice to comply with what the organization expected of them. And there's no reason to be excited about that. So there was no reason to speak loudly or to cause furniture to move suddenly. So.
Hey, Brian, I think to add on to that, the system that you created with performance-based training that had accountability built into it, meaning the parts and pieces times and meeting that standard that you established, also helped weed out the people. So you gave them the time through coaching for them to grow, develop, and if they failed to take ownership of their own growth in that system, they came to us in many cases to say, this just isn't for me.
Correct.
And it was easy because the training had structure to it and there was accountability built into that training system.
Absolutely. And I think the deal there is that in most states, if it's an employment circumstance anymore, and this relates into human rights issues and some other things, if you're going to get tied up in litigation, my colleagues around the country tell me that that's 2 to 3 years. And it's like, if you've ever been named in a lawsuit, that's like having the flu for that period of time, is what people tell me. And if it takes another week even with that person, or more overtime to bring another coach in to help them learn, that's a bargain, you know, in terms of saying, no, we did everything we could to help Crandell be successful. And in spite of this regimen, in relation to this methodology and these coaches, these are the efforts that we went to. So, you know, that we were what I'll say, we did what's called reasonable diligence, language of the courts there, to take legitimate job expectations, also language of the courts, to try to help this person be successful. And they were unable. And as Jason Coy pointed out, Chief Coy pointed out, far more often we had people say, I just can't do this. Toward the end of my career, the beginning, not my proudest moments. So I learned it by mistakes.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting when you, the question Jack had, more often than not, what I see is people come to us with, you know, as administration, and, you know, want to tell us that someone's not doing good, and where do we go first? Evaluations, right? What are the evaluations that they've been doing for all those years before that say? All good employees that didn't take action. People don't do the work sometimes at the lower level and then find that they want us to do something about it. And then you're like, well, let's go for it. They're not doing a good job. Let's get that paper trail going, and it is nowhere to be found. So I think it's a two-way sword, and we hire the right people first and foremost. I agree with Chris's question. We do some military protocol, and I go to it every year to our twice a year academy, and I cringe and I'm asking the leadership, well, why do we do that? And because people think that's what makes a good firefighter, and I'm like, we don't treat our people like that. We don't line our gear up like that in the morning every day. Nothing that we do looks like anything that we do. I think there's some good parts to the discipline and things like that. Teamwork, it makes them, you know, do good teamwork and stuff. There's some parts, but screaming at them, getting in their face and doing all that stuff, like, that's not the environment they're going to come when they work at my organization.
Chief, if I could jump in, and Chris, I know we've talked, and as a graduate of some of the finer institutions the military has to offer, I wholeheartedly agree with Chief Crandell's point. You're aligning the training to the need at the other end of the pipeline, and there's some very specific things. The problem is people have a tendency to look at the movie, the TV show, it looks great, you know, that this is really cool stuff, but they're not seeing the context for what they're training for. Or in a lot of, honestly, a lot of times it's a caricature. It's a cartoon figure of what's actually going on. So but they internalize that as reality. They think it looks cool. They think that helps drive a point home. I would agree with the last speaker. There's certain parts of it that we should be looking at as fundamentally good. You know, the basic discipline part. If you're in training, if you're in basic training or recruit training or whatever, and you've got 20, 30, 60 bodies, you can't just have a mob moving around. So yeah, hey, we got to line things up, and we got to left, right, or something. But the whole Gunny Hartman Full Metal Jacket routine in our environment makes no sense whatsoever, and it doesn't achieve anything. But that's not to say the other extreme of the 100% recruit school. I made a point one time that in my daughter's 3rd grade class, not everybody was going to go to 4th grade. So how could we have 100% recruit school for 6 sessions in a row? There was a flaw there. But the other extreme of, you know, Hell Week and that whole mentality misses the point.
Yeah, I think you got to look at your customer too. And thank you for those comments. You know, last time I looked, and it's been a while, and maybe somebody on the line can refresh. You look at the number of members of the military that are younger than 26 years old and male. So there's actually something to that, right? Evidence is that prefrontal cortex, executive function development biologically in the brain for the average male is complete at 26, which means 50% are not completed at 26. And why that's significant is some of that order and structure that you see in the military is because the workforce you're dealing with is 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. And they are materially different, biologically different human beings than, as Chief Coy pointed out, 26 years old, 28 years old. And you think about the 32-year-old, Chief Van Dorp, 32-year-old recruit that worked in tech in downtown and said, you know what, I got bit by the big red truck thing, right? And the guy's coming to you and you're like, you may be new to us, but you ain't new to the world, dude. Or, you know, what happens if we share with you what right looks like, and what if we model it for you? You know, and now you really do give that person an opportunity to select themselves into our system. So lots of good conversation there.
Hey, Caleb, I'd like you to speak up there, if you will, brother, and fire off those questions.
Oh, I just had one. So I was kind of curious about, once you reach the real speed portion of it, then do you add like kinks to the system so that they have to think back through the process?
That's a great question. So people say, well, you're making robots. And I say, well, if you want to talk about putting on the standard SCBA that agency uses, you bet we're turning them into robots with that. The real question is, what are you going to do with the freed up cognitive capacity, right? And that's where we put in, I'll call them variables. And so what we call it is, we say go from simple to complex, go from standard to random, because we're in the complex random business. So what that means is, when we build a skill base of fundamentals and they're highly habituated in the fundamentals, we have now put ourselves in a position where they can take that part of their attentional and cognitive capacity, pay attention to critical factors in their situation. So we would call it improving their situation awareness and problem solve. What we do absolutely is keep those challenges real, and we step them up in complexity. So we're not going to start off by crashing the 747 into the glass truck next to the bus with the hemophiliac kids, right? So it's a stepped process where there's always challenge in that new scenario. So it exercises their fundamentals, and it also gives them the opportunity to problem solve. We're also going to help them understand the process, and Bruno lined it out really well: critical factors, risk management, produce your strategy, build the IAP, and just keep going on that. So we're going to give them the tools to succeed with that. So absolutely, when they are competent in the fundamental skills, turn up the challenge set, but same stuff applies. Show them what right looks like, teach them the process, teach them what they should pay attention to, so that you build trust, and that when you tell them, hey, you can do this, they believe you, right? So absolutely, yeah, no question.
Hey, Brian, you don't place a hidden trap inside of that scenario, though, do you? Something that they're not prepared for?
Only if I want to destroy the relationship and the underlying trust. Sorry, the major personality flaw right there. So no, we don't. Because again, and I learned this as a chief officer, was to say, I want capable people on my crew, right? So what I'm really doing is saying, I want you to stretch a little, Jace, right? I need you to work with me on this, because I want to know how we can help better prepare you to be successful at the work. So the mindset was very different for me, from basically screwing with them to saying, we're going to stretch and we're all going to learn from this, because 51% of your performance is you, but 49% is me. And I own that. And if I'm being fair and sharing that expectation set up front with you, then there's every reason that you should do well, and those mistakes you make should be rational. In other words, it should be pointing out a place where you and I need to collaborate and figure out how to do better, right? The work's plenty challenging. At least it was when I was in the field. The work is, and I think it's very complex today. I think the work is plenty challenging, and we don't need to be screwing with people what we should say is give us your best work. Gotcha, Pete. We
Yeah.
should give us your best work.
Yeah, we can even, there are times when we would even tell them, this is the wrinkle we're adding, and this is where you're going to fail, right?
Or this is where you're going to be challenged. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right. And no secret about it, right? You guys are doing really good, so now we're going to add this, and this is, so that, because at the end of the day, you want them to stretch, you want them to reach, but you also want them to succeed. I mean, the genius instructors are the ones where their crews, their students never fail, right? They always achieve the objective, right? They might have to work hard. It might take them a couple of tries, but the day ends with accomplishment.
Yes.
Those are genius instructors, because they're reading that group just right, and they're keeping them right on the edge. And those guys walk away on the biggest high they've ever had in their life. And they really are better, and they retain that because they had such a successful training session. They retain it.
A couple things with that, Pete, I want to just really add to, and you said it, is a couple of tries. And that kind of goes with the question, right? Is to say, when we add the challenge, I tell folks, always plan on 2 reps, minimum 2 reps, and preferably more. Why is that? Because the evidence of learning is an observable change in behavior. It's not a critique afterward. So that's part of it. But the most meaningful part is, give me a chance to do this again. And when you do that, what you hear from people say is, this is about redemption. So I would ask them, who are you redeeming with your second attempt at this? And Pete, I see you smiling. Who are they redeeming, Pete? I can't hear you. Lost the mic.
I mean, I would say they're redeeming themselves. They're former.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, we all know, we've all done it. As soon as you do it, you go, shit, oh, I wish I could do that again. All right, well, then,
man, if I had that to do over again, I'd do this and this and this. Absolutely.
Let's do it. Let's stop right now. We let, and it depends on the class, but like in Illinois at the Fire Service Institute, when we're running fire officer school or the leadership class, we let the students stop. They can say, whoa, stop. No, this isn't what we want. And we don't do that all the time with every group, but when we've got the right group, and we'll start giving them permission. You guys, if you guys want to call timeout, you call timeout on this. We let them reset and start again, especially when we're rotating people in the leadership positions. Why not?
We would tell them, when you correct, pick it up from right where you are, because that's how it occurs in the field. There's no timeouts in the field. So what we do is we say, pick it up from right where you are, recover from that. Now they're demonstrating resilience, grit, all these things that people say are intangible, and I disagree with that, right? Thank you, Seth, is just to say, listen, we're going to do this again, and we're going to pick it up from right where you are, so you'll always have the chance to redeem yourself with this. And remember that learning is an observable change in behavior. The only definitive feedback there is for the rep you just completed is another rep. That's how we're going to know what you learned, right? And the truth is, the third rep will inform us about what we learned on the second rep. And so when we tell them, hey, this is, what do you think you want to do to prevent that from happening next time? You recovered from it, and they'll tell you, and you're like, yeah, that's what we want, man. We want to hire you from the neck up as well as the neck down.
So that's exactly to this point, Brian. Jack has asked the question, do you ever, and this is going back to what I was trying to get at in the beginning, was do you ever let them fail as long as it won't injure or kill others?
Only if I have someone that can't be reasoned with, that just simply has to touch the stove. And then super controlled circumstance. And that is, interestingly enough, that's affective. I mean, that's attitude. That is generally nothing to do with cognition or psychomotor. But that's only and we have a full discussion about it. Like, you feel like you have to touch the stove. That's what it looks like to me. And at some point, it's like, and again, very controlled way. I'm not letting them fall off a roof, and you're not suggesting that. And I get that. But yeah, generally speaking, if we have effective trust with them, if we have a rational nexus, if we have a why, the vast majority of people are willing to extend that trust to us, which we value greatly, and allows us to make that happen. We just took our leadership simulations that we're doing for Fire Officer 1, live action role-playing simulations of case studies in Fire Officer 1 certification, Montana. We did it over 2 weekends, two-day weekends. And Seth, a bunch of your folks have been through this, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, and it works there in terms of saying we don't let them get the crazy guy in the simulation until they've mastered the fundamentals. And it's amazing what happens when people put themselves out there in a simulated work environment. Well, some of that skepticism goes away, and routinely I'll just close out with this, Seth, is to say, if the simulation's good, a lot of times what we'll hear is, you know what, that was a lot harder to do than I thought it was when I was watching it. And then you know you're there, and that's humility. So without bandages, right, and medical treatment, that's humility. And and if that's a life skill for a lifetime employee for our members, then the sooner we can give them the opportunity to demonstrate humility in the face of challenge, the healthier we're going to be as an organization all the way through it. I would consider it a flag, particularly if they were anything close to 26 years old and male, or 24 years old and female. If I saw that, particularly a second or a third time, that's beginning to define some maladaptation there. That would be a flag for me to say there's something else going on here that I need to understand.
We're wrapping this thing up, Brian. What besides the Knowles text, what other books or products out there would you recommend to better understand adult learning?
Anders Ericsson is a researcher at Florida State University. He's the guy that did the research that Malcolm Gladwell butchered with the 10,000 hour rule, because not a rule at all. It was actually an observation that came out of Ericsson's research. The book is PEAK, P-E-A-K. If anybody writes me a note, I'll send you the whole reading list that goes with it, along with a scholarly research review as well, to just say, you know, here's the popular literature and here's the actual research. Sometimes, like in Ericsson's case, it's both. He is both a scholarly researcher as well as a very good popular writer. So if somebody said one book, I'd say Malcolm Knowles, right, talking about adult learners. If you had a time for a second book, I would absolutely take a look at PEAK, P-E-A-K, Anders Ericsson, 2 S's, out of Florida State, and that'd be a great start. There's many others as well.
Awesome. So just to reiterate, you know, me and Jason put our email up at the top of this text train on the right. I think everybody can find us through isfsi.org, but we can push forward pertinent information to Brian as well. You know, both me and Jason have his contact. So if we're missing something, or if you didn't get your question answered, please reach out and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. In closing, Brian, you have anything to add?
No, just to add that on the bottom of that PDF that they download is my contact information. I'm an accessory in my wife's life. Apparently I served some function, and Seth knows my family well, and so does Jason, so they're smiling because of that. And so I got plenty of time. I'm still interested, as Chief Van Dorp so eloquently said it. I think what he said was, I still got gas in the tank, I think is what he said at that conference. And I still got some gas in the tank. I got some other, but we'll talk about that in our time, old guy stuff. But you know, depends, beautiful thing, right? So anyway, so yeah, anytime, man, just reach out. Happy to dialogue, always learning, plan on always learning. So
well, it's a super big honor having you on this, Brian. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to hang out with us, because this is a big deal. It's a very, very good and well spent happy hour. So I really appreciate you. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, push them forward to me. Pete, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to give the guys here, because we've got a lot of people that have been coming along consistently every week, which we really appreciate. In July, we're going to shift to twice a month. And it's just because it makes it easier for us to schedule these things, get quality speakers like Brian, gives the staff a chance to push things out. And then also for the follow-up, right? For us to spend some time with guys that had questions that couldn't get answered and things. So starting in July, we're going to go to the first and third Wednesday of every month. Should be easy enough to keep track that way. And we'll be pushing other stuff out, but I thought I'd just bring it up to this group because you guys are hanging out with us on a regular basis. So every week through June, and then starting in July, the first and third Wednesday of the month, we'll be continuing to do this. Should be good.
Awesome. Well, with that, thanks everyone, and don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us and we'll pay it forward. Thanks again, Brian. Appreciate you.
Way to go, Brian.
See you,
Thanks, guys.
Chris.
Caleb, you want to stay on for a sec?
What am I supposed to do, Seth?
Yeah. So Caleb, we're still working up through that TOC here diligently. We're kind of switching gears. We're realizing that it's not going to work unless we're kind of in a Zoom or go-to meeting type of format. But we just had a meeting on it today, and we're trying to push forward and really get that thing nailed down. I think it's going to graduate towards a Zoom type meeting or a go-to type meeting for a class. So stay tuned. I know I keep on passing the buck on you, buddy, but we're trying real hard to have a good polished product.
Okay, sounds good. I just didn't want to miss anything if I did. So.
Nope. You're going to be in the first pilot class, brother. I promise you that.
Wait, you're on the radar screen, man. We're not going to let you go.
All right, thank you guys. Hey, I got the got my sticker right there. So.
Well, hey, Caleb,
Yes,
we
sir.
talked yesterday about this with you guys. A good opportunity for you would be to take a road trip. It's only, I don't know, 10 hours up to Great Falls from us here, and sit through 3, 4, 5 days of their academy and see how they run their training. It's exactly what Brian's talking about. I know Seth would host you too if they're doing some stuff there or in Big Sky, but you can't grasp hold of the concept until you actually witness the success. And in 9 days, they take young firefighters that don't have a single clue about the fire service, and on the 9th day, they're a fully functionally operational crew. And it's pretty impressive because it's all about the reps and practicing perfect. So I know Brian would welcome you and put you in contact with John Culbertson to facilitate that. So.
Awesome. Yeah, and I just sent you an email, Brian, asking for the reading list, so you'll have my contact info. And I'm just trying to figure out this training officer thing. So it's anything I can learn is fantastic.
Yeah, Caleb, everybody's been there, right where you're at. And if they want to take a trip up to Montana, I'll put you up and come to Big Sky and hang out for a little bit, and everybody else will up here too. So.
Oh, definitely, and I'll bring my fly rod. So
there you go, man.